Okay, so good evening, everyone. Welcome to this meeting of the Housing and Regeneration Scrutiny panel. Before we get going, I think it'd be a good idea to go around and introduce ourselves briefly. So I'm the chair of this panel. My name is Matt White, and I'll pass over to, I'll start with Philip on my left.
My name is Philip Slaughter. I'm the Scrutiny Support Officer.
I'm Councillor Dawn Barnes from the Liberal Democrats.
I'm Councillor Tammy Hammis from St Anne's Ward.
Councillor Charles R.J. South Tottenham.
Thanks. And we have two Cabinet members present here today. Could I ask them to introduce themselves?
I'm Councillor Donna Carlin, Cabinet Member for Housing, Private Renters and Planning.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Ruth Gordon, and I'm Cabinet Member for House Building, Placemaking and Development.
Thank you very much. And we have a few officers here today, so I've just asked them to introduce themselves briefly, starting with David.
Hi, David Joyce, Director of Placemaking and Housing.
Hi, Denise Gundy, Assistant Director of Housing Demand.
Hi everyone, I'm Peter Bryan, the Assistant Director for Regeneration and Economic Development.
Is that Robbie on the screen?
Yeah, hi, Robbie Erdman, Assistant Director for Housing.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, everyone. Okay, so item 1 is just to remind everybody that this meeting is being filmed for live broadcast and will also be recorded and streamed for viewing elsewhere. So anybody who does attend the meeting, just be aware that this filming is taking place, and just by entering the meeting room, you're consenting to being filmed. Also by anybody else present. As chair of the meeting, I've got the discretion to terminate or suspend filming or recording if, in my opinion, continuation of filming, recording or reporting would disrupt or prejudice the proceedings, infringe the rights of any individual, or may lead to the breach of a legal obligation by the council. Thank you very much. Okay, so item 2 is apologies for absence. I've received apologies for absence from Councillor Harrison Mullane and apologies for lateness from Councillor Moyd. Were there any other apologies, Philip? No other apologies. All right, thank you very much. Any items of urgent business? I'm not aware of any.
No items of urgent business.
Thank you very much, Philip. Right, do any members present here have any declarations of interest relevant to the items on the agenda today? No declarations of interest. Okay, and I'm not being made aware of any deputations, petitions, presentations or questions, just to confirm. No, none of those. So if we could move on to the minutes of our last meeting. This is just to approve the minutes. Do we have any points about the accuracy of those minutes? I actually do have something, but anybody else have any comments? No. Okay, there was just one thing that unfortunately escaped my notice before, which was, let me just see if I can find it. I did note down the it was in the item on the private rental sector regulation, and it was just there was a slight confusion, I think, between additional licensing and selective licensing. So let me just see if I can find exactly where that is. Yes, so it was so under item 54, private sector landlord licensing scheme update. In my opinion, in paragraphs B, C, and J, rather than additional, it should say selective licensing, because I think the new scheme that's being introduced is the selective licensing scheme. The additional scheme is the one that's already in place across the whole borough. So there just seems to be a bit of confusion. So just in those three paragraphs, if that could be amended, and hopefully the panel will agree with that amendment to those minutes being adopted. Yep, agreed. Those minutes being agreed. Okay. Just a couple of things to bring up on there. Just there was an action point regarding our review that came out of that report on the private sector licensing, and Philip sent an email round about the panel to meet up, and so if we could just respond to that, that would be great. And just to make sure, I don't think the action to provide an update on empty homes from Lynn, precisely what that was is in the minutes. But we've not received that yet, have we, Philip? So if we could just note that down as.
Sorry, Chair, I should have understood. So I had a response from Lynn, basically saying that the comparative supply data for empty homes to the comparative data for empty homes, the information wasn't publicly available, so she was having a problem getting that comparative data. So yeah, I think the problem was that she couldn't actually get that information to share with us. So I can follow that up after this meeting.
Thanks for that, Philip. So just to be clear, we'd asked for comparative data with neighbouring homes on empty homes, and at the moment that information isn't available. But are we still going to be looking to get that information? Or
so I think I can go back to the officer and ask if there is a date when she whether she thinks it will be available in the future, whether this is something that is an action that can't be fulfilled.
Great, thank you very much, Philip. If we could just get some clarity on that, that would be good. Thank you. Okay, so that concludes the item on the minutes. So next item is update on the Council's housing delivery programme. So that's from pages 11 to 26. Ruth, are you going to provide the update on that, or is that Robbie?
Well, I can introduce it if you want me to, Chair, with a few sort of comments, and then I can open it up to questions, and any sort of technical things that I forget, I'll ask Robbie to come in, who will give me his expertise and
Fantastic.
Help, that's all right.
That sounds like a good way forward. Okay, crack on. Lovely,
thanks. Well, thank you for bringing this item up on the agenda, because I think it's probably, it's high time that we had a review of the housing delivery programme that the council is very, very proud of. We have achieved a great deal in the last 4 years under difficult circumstances, and I think if we compare ourselves to other boroughs, which we are always doing, I think that we come out with a great deal of pride really in what we've been able to achieve, especially in the amount of delivery of council homes at council rent, and that has been the main driver behind what we are achieving. So there's lots of other councils that are building homes, but they're not always doing it at the same level that we have been achieving that. So the figures are in the report, so I don't need to repeat all those, but just the sort of headline figures is that we've got 1,444 starts on site. That does include some sites where we've had permission to demolish buildings, for example, and that's counted as a start on site. We've got 1,503 sites with planning permission. Where I think that we are sort of most proud really of what we are achieving with our council house developments is on the quality of the build. So we are really pushing hard to get, and going forward we will be absolutely ensuring that we have got our build to passive house standards. That's a bit of a sort of technical phrase for the design of buildings which make sure that when that buildings don't get overheated in the summer and they don't get too cold in the winter. It means that it drives down bills for the subsequent residents, and I think that's a really important feature going forward, given the energy crisis that we're going through at the moment. So, you know, that's one of the features that we are really pushing for in terms of the quality of the build. We're not compromising on that. We're not just throwing up any, you know, cheap housing estates. We are building high quality housing, and I think actually that is one of the things that sort of drives the housing delivery team, if I might be so bold, and that they can be really proud of the type of buildings that we are putting up. And I think that really shows when we've been, you know, that we've been nominated now on several occasions for various awards, whether that's with Inside Housing and various organisations. In fact, tomorrow we're also up for nominations of 2 awards. So fingers crossed that we'll actually come home with a nice little certificate and a bit more of a B, another B in our bonnet, as it were. And I think that is because we have built a really good team together. We have now got, again, the figures are in the report. I think it's 38 members of staff, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, 38 officers, and they're managing a massive budget. And as I said, we are pushing on the quality of the build, and that includes ensuring that we are delivering public realm in areas where we are building, so that existing tenants on the housing estates that we've have got, and where we are building either infill sites or building adjacent to housing estates, that the existing residents benefit from those changes that we make and improvements that we make. They also benefit, by the way, where we can supply homes, and we have a policy of a neighbourhood move scheme, which means that existing tenants can apply to move into the new homes that are built nearby within a certain radius, which at the same time releases their existing flat to go back onto the housing register. So there's lots of other things in the report that I haven't got. I don't want to sort of go through in detail, but you can ask me questions about it and I'll try my best to answer. I do want to draw the committee's attention to which is sort of fairly obvious in the last 2 days, about the really difficult financial situation that we're all in. This has been the case for some time, but obviously this government has been, catastrophic in its handling of the economy, and certainly the budget has meant that it's thrown the Britain's economic system into such disarray that it's quite scary now, especially where we're in a position where we're trying to borrow money, and that borrowing is becoming more and more expensive. So we are going to be managing that as much as we are possible and monitoring the situation. But I do want to just bring to the committee's attention that there is a high degree of risk, financial risk, within the programme that we are going to have to manage and look at in a lot of detail, and we'll probably come back to a further committee when we've sort of seen how the lay of the land is. So I'll leave my remarks there and just open it up for, through the chair, sorry, be happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much for that update. Just before I throw it open to questions, I just had a couple of questions of clarification about a couple of things in the report. So starting from paragraph 3.2, which says a total of 1,444 council homes have now started on site, and 1,503 council homes have been granted planning permission. Are they different homes? So are we talking about a total of 2,947 homes there, or are some of the homes that have been given planning permission included in the homes started on site?
No, Chair. The figures are separate because you can be having planning permission. We wouldn't necessarily have started on site, even though we've got planning permission. So, for example, we've only just had planning permission. There's a couple of schemes that just went through planning, but we haven't yet started on site. On other areas, we have started on site. For example, on the Ashley Road depot, we've started on site in the sense that we have demolished buildings and cleared that site, but that's still yet to have planning permission on it.
So for clarity, the Ashley Road homes, which is quite a chunk, that's included in both figures?
I'm going to ask, so that it's absolutely clear.
It did achieve planning quite recently, but we did start on site before we achieved planning.
So that one is? Yes,
okay, but it's not the case that all 1,444 homes are included in that 1,503 figure. So we are talking about more than 1,503 homes in total in this paragraph.
Robbie, do you want to just clarify that?
Yes, there will be some homes that either have started on site without planning permission or have planning permission that haven't started on the site. I'm not sure of the precise number. It's not a massive number. Most of the schemes that have started on site do have planning permission, but we could get that exact number for the committee if that was helpful.
Thank you. I suppose my ask is for a little bit more clarity about what the figures represent when we're seeing them, because it's not so clear in that paragraph. This is more of a kind of general point about how figures are presented in reports. This isn't a specific criticism of anyone here. It's just generally how figures are presented in reports, that it's not clear. Obviously, we're saying there is an overlap. It's not clear even now how big that overlap is between those two figures. So let's just leave that point at that. The other question on clarification I had was a similar one, actually. When I go down to 3.19, I suppose it's the same question, really, when I'm saying the question is a general one. 3.19, we're talking about our current target is that 35% of the homes we build will have 3 bedrooms and 10% will have 4 bedrooms or more. Are we there talking about 35% or 45% of homes?
35% with 3 and 10% with 4. So a total of 45% that would be 3 bedrooms or more. But of those, 10% would be 4 bedrooms or more.
Okay, that's clear. So it's 35% with 3, exactly 3, not 35% with 3 or more. Okay. Oh, there was one other question of clarification, which is this is going to the section that I think members will have questions on, which is the challenges currently facing the delivery programme. In paragraph 4.2, it's not clear from what's set out there what precisely the BCIS index is. Could we have some clarity on that, please?
I'll let Robbie answer that if you don't mind.
Yes, so the BCIS index is, I guess, the index used in the construction industry to track material prices. So, often in building contracts and such, like if you have an inflation clause in a contract, you would use the BCIS index to measure inflation to guide that. So it's probably the most accurate measure of construction inflation that we have.
Thanks, Robbie. So it's a measure of inflation in the building industry. That's okay. Thank you very much for that. Okay, I will now throw it open to questions. I see Councillor Barnes with her hand up, so go ahead.
Thank you, Councillor White, and thank you for asking for clarity on 3.2, which was on my list of questions. I've got a question that probably isn't entirely relevant to this paper, but it comes up here because it talks about the chocolate factory site. And I just wanted to ask if we could have a report in the not too distant future on businesses in these regeneration areas as well, where they're getting moved to, or if there's going to be alternative premises for them. The council homes is obviously what this report is about, but within that there are places to work, there are social spaces, and there are businesses in that particular area who I would like to know what their future is, because there's some excellent businesses there. So that's one question. I'm just going to be cheeky and have a second. Looking at 3.55, the housing delivery programme comprises 3,463 homes, and that's 2,919 for council homes. So that leaves 544 homes, which I assume are up for private sale. And if that's the case, I just wondered if we could take a look, and again, it's something you can't answer immediately, but there's also a risk there around mortgage products being removed and what the demand for those will be and what the risk is to the council, as that's all quite new. I wouldn't expect to see it here, but it's something that I think we need to monitor and have some clarity around the risk to which the council is open. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, would you like to go ahead to answer those questions?
Yeah, if I just come back on a couple of those points, I think we could probably do a written note on the chocolate factory and the and the businesses that are around there. Some of those businesses are not, businesses that have got leases with the council, but they are leasing from, Workspace, for example, that as far as I know, and I know there are some concerns there about them finding space and so on. Part of that site is will also account for the reprovision of Workspace as well as housing on that site. But if we give you a written paper with an answer that relates to the businesses, I would just say, just for the sake of the record, that the council is absolutely wanting to ensure that all businesses, where we can, and to keep them in that area. We are very interested in making sure. We did not so long ago try and actually acquire some more Workspace, but we weren't unfortunately successful in that. We were outbid on that particular aspect, but we are developing the Cumberland Road, which we've put over to Workspace, and we hope that with the refurbishment of that there will be extra Workspace available there. And around that area where we've got the cultural quarter, we know there are a lot of very, very good businesses that are with artists and that are doing extraordinarily good stuff that we definitely want to make sure that we keep in the borough. So we are really working as closely as we can with those businesses. I don't know whether we've got Peter O'Brien here as well, who might want to add some words to that, or Robbie might want to come in on that specifically on the chocolate factory site. I don't know.
I'm happy to kind of just make a couple of comments around the kind of business space in regeneration areas. Generally speaking, I think this is something that's gone up the kind of political and policy agenda quite substantially in the last 3 to 5 years or so, as a real emphasis on having not just workspace, but different types of workspace at different price points. It's a significant feature of Haringey that we are predominantly a residential borough, and the vast majority of land is allocated to residential. There's only a fairly modest amount allocated to economy and other uses, and that space is in very, very high demand. In recent years, we've seen very significant increase in the value of that on the market, which has put a lot of pressure on existing businesses, community uses and others. So I think this remains a very kind of important sort of policy focus area for us as we kind of try to balance the demand for different types of uses in areas like the cultural quarter in Wood Green, where there's huge pressure on housing, kind of this paper is discussing, but we're very conscious that there's a hugely important role for other uses to help make successful places. So I think that very much remains a very big focus for us, but not denying the challenges around that as well.
Councillor Hymas.
I had 2 questions, but maybe I'll start with the. So it was. Sorry, just give me a second. So I can see that the target at the moment is 45% of homes to have 3 bedrooms or 4 bedrooms. And as I understand, the proposed target is 50% going forward. So that's a 5% increase. Has there been any consideration of the breakdown of that 50% of council homes into 3 and 4 bedrooms? Will it be the case that it will be 35% 3 bedroom and 15% 4 bedroom, or is that not a question that we have answers to yet? And I think related to that, I know that a lot of the burden of temporary accommodation comes from those in family-sized housing, particularly given the rent increases in Haringey at the moment have been huge. And I know that in August alone, I think around 1 million residents across the country faced Section 21. And I know that of course has an impact on homelessness. And while they come from different budgets, it feels to me like, economically speaking, for the council, rather than paying all this money out often in temporary accommodation costs, is there a way in which we can, really refocus our efforts to build family-sized homes? Because all my experience already as a councillor has been that that's where the demand is, particularly given how completely unaffordable it is to rent privately at the moment.
Thanks. Yeah, it's not only your experience, but it's every councillor's experience, is that most of your housing casework is about either overcrowding or people that are living in they're really struggling in accommodation that is not big enough for them. So we're absolutely aware of that, and it's a huge, huge problem. The problem is, of course, that we can have as many ambitions as we like to get those bigger homes, but it's a question of how we get the viability on them, because of the way in which we have to pay for those homes. The bigger homes cannot command as big a rent, as large a rent, as proportionately speaking, as the cost. So, for example, if we build a site with predominantly 1 and 2 bedroom homes on there, then the viability on that scheme will come out positively. We'll make a sort of small profit for the HRA, if you like. It's not profit in the sense of, somebody's like going away and getting a large amount of money. It's profit that is ploughed back into the housing revenue account. If we build more 3 and 4 bedroom homes, then the rent that we can command off those homes doesn't give us the viability, so they will come out at an overall loss. So what we have to do is organise the programme such that it balances itself out, always trying to push that envelope towards the larger size homes as much as we can, but the viability prevents us from, otherwise what we would do is just build 3 and 4 bedroom homes. In our existing stock, which is roughly about 15,000 homes, Donna's here, so I'm hoping that I've got these figures right, but it's roughly that we've got 30% as 3 or more bedrooms in our existing stock, so that's about 5,000 homes, but we've got 30% which is 1 bedroom homes. So, and obviously the another 30 odd percent is 2 beds. So it's about a third in terms of our existing stock, and we have got a big overcrowding problem in that, so we're always constantly trying to shift. We're also doing other things, like we're trying to have policies that if people want to downsize, then we're making that easier for them by the neighbourhood move scheme, and then that would release a larger flat for us to rent out. And we're also just very, very recently, we're looking at elsewhere in our portfolio where we've got land and buildings to see if that can be utilised for maybe sort of modular builds and something like that to relieve some of the pressure, then we will certainly be looking at that. So it is a sort of constant struggle to try and build as large as possible, and but stick within the financial strictures that we have. I hope I've explained that, but if there's loads of other experts, maybe if Robbie wanted to add anything to that, I'm sure he could.
I think Councillor Gordon's covered that really well. The one thing I would add that we're looking at the moment is we are looking at our existing stock when it becomes void to see whether we can do things like loft conversions and extensions as well. So it's not just about what we do through the new build. It's also about what we do with our existing stock as well. And just to also reiterate, whilst there is very, very big demand for family-sized housing. We do have urgent demand for all forms of housing. You know, we have very significant numbers of people in Band A and Band B who need 1 and 2 bedroom homes too. So whilst I think the family-sized housing is the area where perhaps we've had the least supply coming through and people waiting the longest, there is that very urgent demand across all sizes of housing, and it's very acute everywhere.
Thank you. Okay. Okay, Councillor Hammis, you have a follow-up, brief follow-up. Yeah.
So do you think that the 5% increase in the target is ambitious enough?
I think it's trying to strike a balance between ambition and achievability. That's what I'm saying. You know, we could say, oh, I want to do 100% of, you know, larger homes built, but we know we couldn't possibly achieve that because we haven't got the finances to do it. So we would end up having to get money from, you know, selling more on the open market or using different types of rent. So it just won't stack up. So it's ambitious, but we think it's realisable is what we're trying to do.
See, Robbie wants to come in here.
It's also based on our strategic market housing assessment. So it's based on sort of independent analysis of our waiting list and what the expected population growth is in the borough going into the future as well. So it's not a figure that we've magicked out of the air. It is based on, you know, an independent market assessment.
Okay. Oh, okay. No, that's fine. That's fine. I just do want to let other panel members have a.
Yeah, I was just going to add in there that we are less reliant on market sale than probably any other borough or most other boroughs in London, which I think is quite an achievement.
Okay. Thanks for that. Okay. Okay. Would you like to add something, Councillor Carlin?
I just want to reiterate what Robbie said. Is that in terms of larger homes, we've both got our building programme to build new homes, but we are also looking at converting street properties or anywhere that's got putting loft conversions. We can add 1 or 2 bedrooms onto already existing homes. So to build that into our voids programme, so when a property becomes void and there's space to increase the size of that property, to do that, which is much cheaper, obviously, than building something from scratch. So that's also in the mix. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. Okay, Councillor Moyd, I saw your hand and welcome, and also welcome to Councillor Blake who joined slightly late. So, Khaled, have you got a question?
Okay, yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm just looking at paragraph 4.1919. There is a reference to 2 construction companies or developers which have gone into administration. Luckily, the projects have continued, which is a good thing. But I wanted to understand, because elsewhere in the report we are told that there are 87 sites where we've got construction going on. What is the profile of you know, there's an expression used here, SME house builders are employed on council schemes, but we also know that on High Road West, for example, we have a fairly sizable house builder, developer, you know, in the form of Lend-Lease. So what is the profile, and is there a council policy? Are we trying to support SME house builders? And then also report talks about there are some others who are at risk of going into administration. And obviously the economy being in a bit of a free fall, inflation, high inflation, and the cost of borrowing going up. What are the risks? So 2 questions. I mean, is there any policy in terms of what kind of developers we have? And sort of what is the risk assessment given the current, the volatility in the economy? Are we likely to have more companies going into administration? And what are we doing?
Thanks. Well, if I knew which companies were going to go into administration, I think I'd have a crystal ball. But in terms of where we've got agreements, I think I'm right in saying that we've only got development agreements with Lend-Lease on High Road West, with Argent on the Wellbourne site, and on the Red House site, all of which were done some time ago. So mostly what we are doing is contracting on our sites. Where possible, we can use local firms, but we also have to, use companies through a sort of open and transparent procurement process. It's getting probably more and more difficult. I'll ask Robbie to come in and explain some of the difficulties as well, because we're trying to keep a very tight rein on making sure that where tenders come in, that we hold them to those tenders. But we're finding there's more and more that companies are looking at their own costs, and costs are rocketing. I think it's written in the report that the increase in costs of steel alone is huge. It's gone up by 80%. I mean, that is phenomenal. You can't build a house without steel. And the cost of aluminium, for example, massive increase. The cost of labour has gone up, and obviously the cost of borrowing has gone up. So it is a really difficult market. But maybe I'll ask Robbie to come up and to come in to explain how the team are managing the contracts that we've got, and also the element of community wealth building that we're trying to embed, as well as the employers' rights that we attach to any contracts that we have. Robbie, could you come in on those points?
Yeah, I mean, it's worth saying it's a really difficult environment at the moment. I don't think anyone would say that. It's worth also saying that the two firms on council developments who went into administration, those are both subcontractors. So they weren't the main people responsible for the build. And we've not yet had an example of our main contractor going into administration. Occasionally we have some fears about one contractor or the other. We haven't yet been faced with the prospect of that. It's worth saying that in terms of how we manage the build contracts, we do make sure that we keep a healthy amount of we only pay for works as they're carried out and as are certified on a monthly basis. And we also keep a sort of healthy set of retentions. 3 to 6% depending on the scheme, which does mean that if we do get into a place where a contractor falls over mid-build, we are quite well protected against that. If we take any of our acquisitions from developers, what we do make sure is that at the time at which the acquisition goes through, we own the land. So in a worst case scenario where they're not able to complete the building contract, again, we'll own the land, we'll have kept some retentions, we'll have only paid for the construction works that have been done. So it's a very difficult market, but the team are managing it very closely and very carefully. In terms of community wealth building, we in all of our contracts through the LCP, but also our other contracts as well, we do put stipulations in around use of local labour, apprenticeships, other sort of community benefits as well, and that's a core part of what we'll do through our programme. And through the LCP we do use a number of local firms as well, particularly on our smaller projects.
Could I have a follow-up, please?
Thanks. Yes, you can have a follow-up.
Okay, thank you. Just on the back of that, obviously the main concern is, or one of the concerns when these house builders are going into, in this case, Robbie clarified that there were subcontractors, is whether the council is losing money. But you've also said that they get paid, contractors are getting paid after work is done. I just want to understand, is that always the case, or is there any kind of form of advance payment, and that there remains a risk that obviously with the economy being so volatile, that if there are other contractors or subcontractors at risk of going into administration, that the council may lose money? Do we have any such risk?
Construction, so there's always risk. We certainly won't be paying anyone for more work than they've done. However, it is a well-known principle that if you have to bring in a different contractor to complete a job, it's never as straightforward as having one throughout the sort of build program. So there is always risk when companies fall over, but we are managing it as best we can through ensuring that we're only paying for work so certified as an EA. We're keeping healthy retentions, and we're on fixed price contracts. So a lot of the time, you're finding contractors are probably losing quite a lot of money on our works because we've been engaging in fixed price contracts up front until recently. So we protected ourselves against the risk as best we can in the market, but it is construction in a highly volatile market. And I can't pretend that we won't ever be in a scenario where the council might be faced with the prospect of losing money.
Okay, thanks. I have a question myself, actually, about the houses that we're building for private sale. I just obviously this is something that's being done in order to cross-subsidise the houses that we're building for council rent. But what I was interested in, because sorry, it wasn't clear to me actually. First of all, presumably we're keeping the freehold on the land, are we, and selling a leasehold, or are we selling the freehold first of all? There'll be leasehold, right? But presumably there'll be long. The leasehold will be fairly long, and I suppose my question is, what kind of calculations have been done about whether that is the best way to approach it, rather than, for instance, building houses for rent but not at council rent. Now I know that there are challenges for the council doing that, and that it has to be done through some kind of an arm's length vehicle of some kind, that the council, as the council, can only charge council rent. But I'm just wondering whether that could be seen to be preferable to do it that way, because then the council is keeping more of the ownership. I know we're saying we're keeping the freehold, but the leasehold is still something significant to be selling the ownership of. So I'm just wondering why it's been decided to go that route, and whether we're exploring going the other route as well, if that's in any way viable.
Well, it's been the policy for quite some time now that we've gone for really pushing for as many homes at council rent as possible, keeping the for sale element down to an absolute minimal, just for the purposes of cross subsidy. Obviously, in some areas we can sell those council homes at a lot higher value than in other areas. So what we do is we try and balance it out over the whole programme. I think it's a contentious area about whether we introduce other types of rental into the programme, but I would not rule it out, because I think we will have to look at all of these aspects because of even if you just took the rising interest rates alone, let alone the fact that we don't know whether the Tories will allow us to increase rents, for example, or whether they will ask for a cut in rents, or whether that rent increase, if we allowed it, won't even match what we will need to carry out repairs and so on. So the whole element of how we manage the housing revenue account is really, really a very difficult one, and the council, as all councils across the country, are, I think, in a very difficult position. I think we've done well so far to do this, but I do think that we have to have a conversation amongst ourselves as councillors as to what other means we look at and which ones are more palatable than others. I think that would be a sort of grown-up conversation to have, but nevertheless I think it's probably likely that we are going to have to look at some changes, in my opinion. That is, but nothing has been decided or discussed at that level. I'm just expressing my opinion on that.
Okay, but currently the policy is still cross subsidy of this type takes place through sale rather than through buildings for for rent and market rent under the council or other types.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Robbie wants to,
And-
to
and-
add to that.
No, I'll try and I'll let him come in. But I just wanted to say, but really, what I wanted to pin down is that the decision to keep that policy, and I know that the policy was originally decided upon when before you became the cabinet member, but the decision so far to keep that policy, I just wanted to drill down as to whether that was done on kind of, you know, financial grounds on which is most viable, or whether there's a kind of political element to that about the council, you know, the political impact of the council building homes and renting them out at non-council rents.
I suppose the starting point, I hope this answers your question, but the starting point is that we are always trying to max out on us building as many council homes as possible at council rent. And whatever, you know, however we get to that point, that's our sort of starting point. And there's been, you know, there hasn't been any, you know, up until fairly recently, if you remember, you know, interest rates were still quite low until fairly recently. So we were looking at gilts were sort of 1% above base rate, and that's what we were. I think we pay 1% above gilts for public sector loan works board interest, and that is now shot up to 4%. So you can see immediately there is a problem there. It's likely now that with this government and the mess that they've got us in, that interest rates are likely to go up again, I would say. And I don't think it would take a genius to surmise that that is going to be the case. So just as every individual who's got a mortgage is worried about that, obviously when we're talking about multiple millions that we are borrowing to finance our programme, that is a big cost to the council. So I think that we haven't, but it's not been a question of, our main aim is council homes at council rent, as many as possible, and that has always been our aim, and we'll try to keep that aim as far as we can, holding the line.
Sorry, I can see Robbie wants to come
add
in.
something there.
Yeah, just to say, Councillor Gordon's absolutely right. That has always been the aim, and the reason why we chose private sales is because it had the highest cross subsidy, and still to date has the highest cross subsidy that we can bring into the programme. So at the moment, our programme is set up, you know, as Councillor Gordon has said, to deliver those homes, and that's why we've chosen that route. However, if we were to be in a position where the sales market became tricky, you know, there are a number of interim measures that we can take. We can look at all sorts of tenures, either as a temporary measure or as a permanent measure, to change our programme. That's still within our gift.
Okay, thanks for that. Right, there are loads of hands going up. I also see we've been joined by Councillor Diakides, who isn't a member of the panel but would like to ask a question. But I think maybe if we just complete panel members' questions on this item first, and then we'll let you have a question, Isidoros. Okay. Tammy, you wanted to ask a question.
Yeah, I wanted to refer to some of the comments that were made at Cabinet, where I understand that Councillor Williams said that new business models will have to be worked up for the capital projects, which I assume is in reference to the HRA building schemes. I was just wondering if I could clarify, would it be the proportion of council housing that we built? Would it be the proportion of family-sized bedrooms, for example, or is this about looking at, you know, moving back towards kind of forms of joint ventures with private developers, which is obviously something that has caused controversy in Haringey in the past. But I'm just wondering what new business models means, basically.
Yeah, I think Councillor Williams was referring to capital projects that are held within the general fund, you know, not within the HRA. I don't think that discussion was about the HRA as such, from my recollection. You know, and I suppose, you know, if we were talking about the housing revenue account, then we can only operate within the confines of what we're allowed to do. So that means that we have to take into account the rental income any grants that we got, and obviously that rental income has to finance all of the maintenance of our existing stock and the refurbishment programme that is really, really important. One of the things that we probably come across the most when we are trying to build a new scheme is that tenants will say to us, well, what about this repair and that repair and so on? It's a big issue. You know, oh, never mind building a new council home, councillor, can you make sure that my toilet is repaired or my bathroom is fixed up and so on? So, you know, we have to balance the HRA account to make sure that that we've got a refurbishment programme, that we've got a general maintenance programme, and that we've got enough money in the HRA to finance the borrowings that will come out of the HRA. And those are very strict rules that are applied to that. And anything additional to that will come from grants from the GLA, which we've managed to achieve quite a lot of. We've done things like use S106 money where we can, and we've done things like use brownfield site money where we can. So we are trying to pull in bits of money from wherever we are allowed to do it in order to protect the tenants' money. At the end of the day, this is all money that belongs to the tenants and leaseholders that we have in the borough, and we've got a duty to respect that and to make sure that we're not just using that just to sort of go on an out-and-out build programme. We have to account for refurbishment, repairs, and so on and so forth, which, you know, comes under Dana's portfolio. So, yeah, I'm not sure what was meant by Councillor Williams' comments, but I think she was referring to the capital projects that are within the council's general capital expenditure fund, if you see what I mean.
But I mean, are we ruling out joint ventures with private developers? Is that something that you would rule out?
I can't see any joint ventures with private developers that are. There's definitely nothing on the agenda at the moment.
Okay, thanks for that. Right, Isidoris, would you like to ask a question?
Thank you, Matt. I've got three small questions. The first one links very much to your question, your last question, Chair. I noticed in the report no reference to the Community Benefit Society and what progress we made. And I think I would like to hear what progress are we making on this side, whether we added any properties, any problems, and so on. Linked with that is, Chair, that there was a proposal that we were discussing some time ago about, instead of selling houses that we build, that we actually lease them to the Community Benefit Society. The old rules that I remember, unless they've changed, were that after 7 years they would revert to the council as well. Therefore, it was a way of using it. Of course, we would be using them only for those in temporary accommodation to move them out, which in itself saves us money. But just to explore a bit more why we haven't been referring to that one and what progress have we made. The second question is, again on the sales, paragraph 3.53. If I read it right, it does say that we have employed some consultants who advised us on how to sell the house we will build, and they have advised us to appoint, to go into a contract or a partnership with some private agency, whether it's another consultant or agents, which probably it was, a modest amount of money, fair enough. But am I right that we're talking about a contract worth millions, not just 10,000 or 50,000 or something like this, for helping us sell these houses because we are not able to put an advert, if you like, in the local press or something like this, or to go around. Therefore, we need some expert advice on it, that kind of thing. And the third part question is There's no progress in here about what we're doing with the refurbishment of the existing stock and bringing back into whether that is something that probably we should look at at another meeting, or whether you could say something about that, how we're doing with the refurbishment of the existing stock and bringing units back into use, that they're not at the moment.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, that final question, does that link with the housing delivery programme? You're talking about
well, I think the housing delivery, I say it as well, that it is about refurbishing parts of the council stock that they are out of use at the moment because they need work.
Okay, so that's clear.
Okay, I might ask either Robbie or Denise to come in on the HCBS. So there has been a regular purchase of homes through that organisation. It's done completely separately, and I think you're right that they come back to the HRA within 7 years. I'm hoping that's right. But I think Robbie can clear that up because he chairs that board. And in terms of the sales agency, you're right that what we're doing is bringing in expertise. If in the future we could look to doing this in-house, then we would be keen to do it in-house. But at the moment, the number of for sale properties that we've got is very small. For all the reasons that I said in the last response. Also, what I mean by that is that as a site comes forward, the small blocks of the sales, and then the other thing that an agent could do for us is to have a sort of marketing strategy so that we are selling the properties in the same way across the entire borough, and that we've got, the same sort of, advertising logos and things like that, and how we sell those homes. With all of that advice, we've got none of that expertise in the council as we speak. It might be in the future we'll be able to acquire that expertise, just as we have with our housing delivery team. Not so long ago, we didn't have the expertise that we've got of project managers and so on, and now we have got some real expertise from that. Some of that expertise we have grown ourselves in terms of getting, recruits from within the council to work in the housing delivery team. So I'm not ruling out that we wouldn't bring that back in-house, but we at the moment are buying in that service because we think it's not something that we're using all the time. But we will start to need it now as we start to deliver the sites. At the moment, the number of homes that we've actually built and got, handed keys over is 140 something. I can't remember, it's under 200 homes anyway. So we're not in that position yet, but we will be very soon. So this is preparatory work for when we do that, and we can use them as and when. I'll maybe ask Robbie to come in on the question of I think there was some figure given in the Cabinet report as the cost that wasn't in the exempt papers but was in the main report. So I think he could probably give you those figures. And if there's anything else that I've missed off, in terms of, and maybe you could comment on the CBS as well, because as I say, he chairs that particular board. And the refurbishment of the existing stock comes under sort of, Donna's programme. But you're absolutely right in the general point that you're making, that we can't just build homes in isolation. So, for example, on Broadwater Farm, we have got a huge investment programme to refurbish the blocks that are, some of the blocks are coming down, as you know, North Holt and Tangmere, and we are replacing those homes plus building an extra 100 homes. But the rest of the estate has got a huge investment, which is already part of the HRA budget, to make sure that those other blocks are brought up to a high specification and are refurbished so that the whole estate is looking in tip-top prime condition. And we are doing that, by the way, working with the residents on the estate to design in all of those public realm features that are part of that development. So, yeah, if Robbie could come in on the HCBS and any figures that he's got on the sales agency and refurbishment of the existing stock, maybe.
Yeah, if I could start with the HCBS. Sorry, there's a bit of feedback. I don't know if someone's microphone is on. Oh, thanks. Thank you. So the HCBS is on track to purchase. Well, the council is on track to purchase about another 60 homes for the HCBS this year, which will take the total up to just around the 300 mark, which from a standing start a couple of years ago is quite significant progress in terms of the HCBS. Councillor Diakides, you mentioned the idea of the HCBS renting or buying the new build homes. It is something we did look at the time. I think the issue was that when we looked at the rents and the difference in the amount of grant that we'd get from the GLA, it actually made more financial sense to build homes for council rent than it did to put them through the HCBS. So it was something that we actively looked at and did the modelling on, but in the end the numbers didn't quite stack up, and we found that the only way we could really get that really good cross subsidy was through private sale. In terms of sales and marketing agency, it's worth mentioning that while there is a proportion of the contract that is for that advice, which is in the hundreds of thousands rather than the millions, the bulk of that contract is for estate agency fees, and those estate agency fees will only pay for as a proportion of the actual sales that go through the contract. So like you'll find whenever you sell a home through an estate agency, there is a small proportion that the estate agency takes, not just for doing all the viewings, taking people around, but also going through the somewhat quite complicated process of a house sale or a flat sale. And so, but it's worth saying that we'll only incur very significant costs if we do sell hundreds and hundreds of homes through that contract, and there's no minimum obligation on us to use that contract. We could, having left it, we could decide not to use it at all. Although it's most likely that for our larger schemes, which will be quite difficult for us, to sell all in one bulk, we are likely to use that contract.
Thank you very much. Okay, Doris, you want to brief come back?
I think, first of all, I'm really heartened about the figures with the Community Benefit Society, and well done. I think that we are to continue on that one. It sounds a really good idea to develop it. That we started now, we might as well. I do believe as well, very quickly, that Ruth, that we should really look again at the feasibility of at least a proportion of the new build going that way rather than out in the open market. On the issue of the agency, I'll give you the figure that you have given to the cabinet is 3.3 million. All right, we're talking about a huge amount of money. Now, I'm not talking, this is not a small amount of money. That is adds completely to all the costs that we have around it, and etc. So I do think that we really need to look at it. And if I wanted to play the devil's advocate, I would say, what? For someone to teach us how to write an advert or to put sort of a board outside the house to be sold or something to that effect. It is really, is not, doesn't sound on the face of it a good investment, that one. And just a small bit of correction or clarification, actually. Ruth referred to the Broadwater Farm and said that we're building a 100 extra. That, as I understand it, at the moment the plans are for 300 new units, and 250 to be demolished. Therefore, it should be 50, not 100, the net gain. But I may be wrong, but please correct me if you know the figures.
I'm fairly certain, I mean, I can just double check and get the figures back for the committee, but it's just under, I think it's an extra 90 something, maybe 93, 92, I was rounding up to 100 extra that we will get after we've taken into account the demolition of Tangmere and Northolt.
And the other block, the additional one.
I'm sorry?
40 units or something is the other that we were demolishing in order to create
it's a wing of another block you're referring to. Remind me.
Oh, with the Stapleford North. With the Stapleford North. It might be, but I think it means, I think with the demolition of Stapleford North, it meant that we could actually increase the overall build, or if we couldn't do that, we could get more family-sized homes on the site. So it was a balance of that. I haven't got all the detail on the top of my head, but that's my recollection of what we're doing there. On the terms of the agency, the thing is that there is a sort of, you know, outer envelope, if you like, but as Robbie said, what we would be doing is only paying out money on the basis of its commission on what is, so we wouldn't have to use all of that. We have to account for the, I suppose, the outline possibility, but it's on the basis of the you know, a commission rate for each sale, and as I understand it, that was quite a competitive rate when we went out to market, and there was an open and transparent tendering process, and the agency that we chose came up with the best score in that process. Yeah, I don't know if somebody's answered the refurbishment of the existing stock question, one before.
Were you happy with the answer that was provided?
I do agree as well that it is peripheral really to that particular paper. It's related but not quite, so you may want to concentrate on it at a different meeting.
I think we'll deal with that in another meeting, because this is really dealing with the housing delivery programme. Thank you very much. Okay, I did really want to move on, but we've spent an hour on it. But Councillor Raja, you haven't asked a question yet, so I will allow you a brief question.
Thank you. I did say I wasn't going to ask questions, but in view of the points that Councillor Adakidis made about the agency in terms of the use of, I wonder, I don't want to go back in time, but we're where we are, so let's look forward. If you've got any time frame, like you've used the delivery team that was set up to you know, in the previous regime, as it were, and now paying very good dividends. So when do you think that the council would be able to say, okay, well, this is the cutoff, excuse me, to have the talent in-house to do this piece of work? Have you got any time frame in mind? Because yes, there's this contract, you can use it and pay for whatever at each time during the sale, but I think it probably would be better if you were, or the council were to say, well, by such and such a date, so there's a target where you can actually have an in-house team to do that piece of work. It's just to follow up on that point.
Yeah, I suppose what I'd say in response to that is that at this stage, we're just taking this decision because we think it's the most practicable decision to take. But it's always going to be under constant review. We've got a cabinet member who has got responsibility for insourcing and is constantly looking at each portfolio as to where we can bring services back in-house. We will do that on the basis of having a prudent look at whether it is cheaper and more efficient to bring it back in-house, and where we will do that as quickly as possible. I couldn't give you a time frame at this point.
Just on that point, that cabinet member who has responsibility for insourcing, does that cabinet member have any role when a kind of a new service is being, if the decision is being made to contract something new out, does the cabinet member for insourcing have an input into that decision, seeing as their responsibility is to kind of alter that decision?
Yeah, and it was a robust conversation, I can tell you that. Yes.
Okay, all right, leave it at that. You didn't want to follow up? No?
I was going to, but there's no need. It's all right. But I'm just surprised in terms of the answer that was given, because I would have thought that irrespective of the cabinet member for insourcing, is your portfolio. And I think that there should be a time frame to work to train staff, to have them in-house. But, we're where we are.
Yeah, go on, you can respond to that.
We've had really long conversations about this very topic, because obviously nobody wants to insource anything. If we can, outsource anything. It's just where we are not in a position to deliver that service ourselves. We see it as being an interim measure. It will be constantly under review. It is on my agenda, is on the agenda of all the cabinet members. So it isn't something, just because I'm not putting a date on it now, it's absolutely under constant review, and the officers are well aware of my position on this. And, the cabinet is of one mind, I would say, on this issue as well.
All right, noted. Thank you very much, panel, for your questions. Thank you. Obviously, that's a lot to chew on, and I think the main thing that we take from this is the huge challenges that the housing delivery programme faces. So thank you very much to the cabinet member and to the officer team for their efforts to deliver the housing that needs to be delivered. And hopefully, well, we'll be keeping an eye on this, but it's obviously not clear yet whether we'll have to amend those targets or wait a little bit longer to see them, and we'll be keeping a close eye on that, but hopefully not. Okay, so moving on, the next item on the agenda is which one is it? It's the this is for the use of the private rental sector to meet housing need, and we have Dana Carlin, who's the cabinet member for housing need and homelessness. That was in our portfolio, and Denise Gandy, who's the lead officer. So Dana, Councillor Carlin, are you going to lead off on this one, please?
Thank you for asking for this paper to come to the scrutiny panel, because it is an important topic. We in Haringey, as I'm sure you've heard, we are trying to acquire and build as many properties as we can, and to have as many council properties as we can, and also to have as many units as possible of temporary accommodation that we actually own. The difficulty that we have is that we have a critical shortage of accommodation in Haringey across all tenures. We have a critical shortage of affordable housing, of both council housing. We have a critical shortage of other housing that we own that we can use as temporary accommodation. And we have a critical shortage of affordable private sector housing in borough, and that puts us in quite a difficult position. Now, the decision was taken, the law was changed. Previously, the law was that if you became homeless and you made an application to your local authority, the local authority would place you in temporary accommodation, and the only way to discharge that duty would be by providing you with a council home. The law was changed, and in 2016 a paper was taken to Cabinet to allow us to use private sector accommodation as discharge of duty. Now in Haringey we have amongst the highest level of residents living in private sector accommodation. over 40% of our residents are living in private sector accommodation in Haringey. This means that they're not just young people flat sharing. We have families in temporary accommodation. We have elderly people in temporary accommodation. And if every time one of those families, households became homeless, the only way that we could discharge duty would be to place them in temporary accommodation until they eventually got council housing. The reality is they would be in temporary accommodation forever. Because we have people in temporary accommodation in Haringey who've been there for over 20 years. It's not the same in boroughs like Hackney or Islington, where it's probably under 5 years for a lot of people. In Haringey, the timescales are astronomical. And that's because we just don't have enough social housing. We're building as much as we can, but the reality is we're losing 350 homes in the last year we lost to Right to Buy. So effectively, we're building to standstill. We're also buying up properties with our receipts, etc., from Right to Buy. So it's not exactly that we're building to standstill, but unfortunately, we're not increasing. We will not, once we build 3,000 council homes, have increased our housing stock by 300 council homes because of Right to Buy still being in place. This makes it really difficult, and it means that not all families or households who become homeless need social rented homes to move into. It would be ideal. Everybody would want social rented homes, but not everybody needs it. There are families, and why I'm saying families observe, I'll come back to that, because of course families with children are often the lucky ones, because they're the ones who we will have a duty to help, and we will have a duty to hold them and provide them with temporary accommodation until they can be moved into an affordable property, which will meet a property at LHA rents. Now, of course, we have the whole additional problem, as Denise knows, and we discuss very, very regularly, of all those people who are single, who don't quite meet priority need thresholds, and who we are finding it even more difficult to help as well. So the policy that we have at the moment, which is that we do discharge, not all households, but that we do discharge into the private sector, has to be part of the mix. It has to be part of our offer in Haringey. We are looking at who we consider it suitable to which households is it suitable, where is it not suitable, and not that many households are getting discharged. We also joined capital letters, which meant that as part of our homelessness prevention, people who were losing their tenancies, households, were able to move seamlessly into a new property that we could, at affordable rent, LHA rent, could seamlessly move. So they never went through they would move from their old property directly into another new let. That's the position that we're in. If we could be in a position where every household that became homeless that we owed a duty to, that was in priority need and everything else, we could keep in temporary accommodation until we could give them a social home, and they would only be there for a few years, as they are in other boroughs. That obviously would be ideal. That's obviously what we would all want. But unfortunately, where we are in Haringey, with the pressures that we have and the shortages that we have, we're just not in that position. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. So I will take questions from panel members, but I just wanted to say something myself about this, because this came out. There was something about the way the paper was presented that didn't really seem to quite gel with what the discussion was that we had that led to this item being on the agenda. So the way we approached this as a panel was that the change in law that allowed councils to discharge their housing duty into the private sector had been a bad thing for those of our residents who are in housing need. The reason being that, and there's something that's not really not really there in the in the paper, but what we call temporary accommodation is actually in many cases far more long-term accommodation than what we might think of as a permanent home in the private rental sector. And so discharging our duty, and once we discharge our duty to somebody, they find a permanent home in the private rental sector. We may once they are made homeless again, they may no longer qualify for us to, for whatever changes of circumstances. We may not accept a housing duty again. So effectively, what we're doing is sending people out into a really kind of very poorly regulated sector. I know we're doing all we can as the council to regulate the private rental sector, but our powers are limited due to tenancy law. So I suppose it just didn't sit well with me that it seems to be being portrayed as a. It depends how you look at it, really, doesn't it? If you look at it from the point of view of the council needing to satisfy its housing duty, then yes, it does give us more options. But for the point of view of a lot of those residents for whom we're finding a so-called permanent home, it doesn't seem like such a positive thing. So and I suppose, when we say we're talking about finding a suitable offer in the private sector, do we consider how long the tenancy is likely to be? Do we look at tenancies? Are there tenancies that are more than a year? Are there maybe tenancies that are only 6 months? That this kind of thing, I think, is really, really important, because when it says some people have been living can end up living in temporary accommodation for 7 or 9 years. Well, if you live in a private rented home for 7 or 9 years, that you're very, very lucky to be able to stay there that long without being evicted. So I suppose that those are my kind of initial thoughts. I know it's not really well formed into a question, and I don't know if you want to respond or. Yes, go ahead.
First of all, I agree in an ideal world, any household in Haringey that became homeless and approached us, we would be able to say, you can be in temporary accommodation for a limited period of time and move into a social rented home. But there's ideal and there's the practicalities of what we have. I haven't gone into the finances yet. So the practicalities of what we have is that because Haringey, for historic reasons, we weren't bombed enough, we didn't build enough. Weren't bombed enough is why I say that is then you go to other boroughs, their social housing is estate after estate after estate. We have street properties, we have a few estates. It's not like when you go to Hackney or Islington or Camden even, or Southwark, Lambeth, where there will be, I was in Hackney recently, and it's just street after street, block after block of estate after estate after estate after estate. We don't have that. We've got clusters in certain areas. We don't have the housing stock. We have so little accommodation in comparison. Plus, we have over 40% in private rented accommodation. We just don't have the capacity in Haringey to provide every family, as I say, I say that because that's automatically priority need. I'm going to discussions about single adults. We don't have the capacity to provide them a social home. And at the moment, we're not going to while we have right to buy, etc. It's just not something we're going to have. In terms of temporary accommodation, it is costing us out of the council revenue account millions and millions, eye-watering amounts of money to keep households in temporary accommodation. This is mitigated by a grant, which is the homelessness reduction grant, which we use partly to pay for that cost of the temporary accommodation. But it is not out of the realms of possibility that with the current government, they will turn around and go, oh, people can't afford to live in Haringey. Well, why are we giving millions of pounds to Haringey to house people? They should just move where there's housing. It's a grant. It's not secure. If we lose that, and whatever we lose, that's money straight out of the revenue account. So we can't afford to keep people in temporary accommodation ad infinitum, everybody who becomes homeless, because as a council, we actually just can't afford it. It's too expensive. It makes it very difficult. And then what happens is, if we're in that position, what ends up happening is the only way to keep the numbers down is that we have to make really, really hard and harsh decisions at the front. So when people approach us for help, we are making really tough decisions that are really uncomfortable. And all those people who don't have children, who might be on the edge, we're just going, we can't help you. We don't care how desperate your situation is, because we've got nowhere to put you and we can't afford this. So we have to look at it in the round. In an ideal world, we would house every household that became homeless that needed help in council housing that would be available in less than 20 years or whatever. But that's not the position we're in Haringey. Haringey is very, and has always been, a very, very difficult borough in terms of housing. And so, I completely agree with you, and I would love us to not be in this position, but this is the position that we're in. If we could source private sector accommodation that was affordable to use as temporary accommodation in borough, again, that LHA rate would cover the rent, and that wasn't costing us how many thousand a year per household?
4,500 on average.
4,500 per household per year, and that adds up to millions when you look at across the board. And that's taking the 4,500 is taking into consideration that we've also got a whole lot of households in council accommodation, so the private ones are actually costing us more than that. That's on average. Then if we could do that, then it wouldn't be such a problem, because we could easily find private sector accommodation as temporary accommodation until people eventually moved into a council house if they did. But we don't even have that luxury.
Just a specific question, because we're offering landlords financial incentives to, which I'm not saying is a bad thing, but if we offer a landlord an incentive and they take that incentive and they take on, we discharge our housing duty to that landlord, how long is it before that landlord can then? I mean, is there any? Are we just saying it's a year?
It's a minimum of 2 years, and that's in the law.
A minimum of 2 years.
It's a minimum of 2 years, so
Right.
Nobody can be discharged into anything less than 2 years. That's the legal requirement in the change of the law.
And after those 2 years, were the landlord to legally give notice, issue a section 21 notice? Is it? I should know. I've had enough of them myself. Is it then a matter of a new housing needs assessment and that, if they're still in the borough?
Well, if the landlord does want to evict, of course, not all people who become homeless are moving just because they're poor landlords and they want to evict every 6 months or years to put up the rents or whatever and get in new tenants. That's not going to be the position. It will be if the landlord wants to evict. Now, there changes. Is the renter's white paper, is that ever going to become law? For example, if that becomes law, that means the default tenancies will be assured tenancies, and landlord won't be able to evict unless they've got a specific reason. It gets rid of Section 21, no fault, all of that stuff. So the law is changing. It's all of those things. The fact that we're bringing in selective landlord licensing, which is going to, as we've discussed, drive up standards. The poor landlords will leave. I have no doubt they're not going to want to comply with what we're asking them, but that will stabilize our rental market, etc. So,
Sorry, and I am abusing my position as chair, but I'm just asking a series of questions just so I can understand for myself the situation. So, with that 2-year minimum, were the landlord, for whatever reason, to maybe need to evict their tenant in that, and the tenant becomes homeless, then do we still have the housing duty to that person?
No, well, Denise can answer, but no, because
So if the arrangement breaks down within the 2 years, then their original homeless application is reinstated and picked up from that point. If it's after the 2 years, then we go back to a new assessment. So even if someone moves out of borough into an AST, if it breaks down in that 2 years, the responsibility still sits with us to pick it up.
All right, thank you very much for that. Right, I'm sorry, I've asked loads of questions. I'm going to throw it open for. Okay, Councillor Moyed.
Yeah. So I'm aware of the change in the legislation which allows us to place people in private rented sector to discharge our obligations. I personally completely disagree with it. I think it's really terrible policy or change in the legislation. I mean, if people are able to get housing, if the people are able to rent in the private sector, there's no need for them to come to the council. But you did say, Councillor Carlin, you did say that there are some families who we continue to place into council accommodation, albeit in a temporary accommodation. Is there any kind of ratio? Do we have any understanding of what percentage go into perhaps council, temporary accommodation? What percentage are going into private rented sector? So there is one family that I've been helping over the last 2 years. Initially, they were put into private rented accommodation, but they couldn't afford the rent. They're in emergency accommodation with 3 kids, and they've been there for a very long time, nearly 2 years, and nothing's being done about their situation. And there are no doubt other families like that. So I just want to understand what is the policy, and if there is any understanding of the ratio in percentage terms that we are still continuing to support. Thank you.
Well, I mean, I can't give you the ratios, and Denise will give you that, but if, first of all, they shouldn't be placed in that's not suitable. So it has to be suitable. So if they are placed in accommodation that's not affordable, that then is not suitable in this case law. So accommodation has to be suitable. So if, for example, we have households that are hit by the benefit cap, of a single parent, young children, not working, not able to work enough hours, we can't place them into accommodation because they in London they're going to hit the benefit cap. So those kinds of households, for example, we have to put into temporary accommodation. Yes, they're going to be in emergency council accommodation, which is hugely expensive, both for us and for them if they're working, where we will top it up, but they will be left with no money for us to top it up. And then that's the position that we're in. We don't have the council housing stock to move everybody into, especially as quite a lot of them are larger families. And the reality is that we don't have that. So it makes it very difficult for us. We're building larger households. Hopefully the smaller ones will release larger ones within our housing stock, etc. So we're doing everything that we can. And the other challenge that I've given to officers over and over again is to try to acquire everything that we can to use as accommodation for our residents. So whether it's converting buildings, whatever we can do to actually acquire our own accommodation, because the other huge shortage is an affordable private sector accommodation in Haringey. Last year, Capital Letters gave us, 256 properties to use, and we had other properties we used as well. This year, they've given us 42. That's it. Have we had anything since we last spoke?
About 2.
We've had about 2 in the last month, which means We have no affordable private rented sector accommodation in Haringey either. So what are we now going to do? We've got to acquire our own accommodation, because otherwise we're looking at out of borough. Okay, and we may be looking quite far out of borough, because we had an email, a woman and her child had been placed in a hotel in Ilford. That was the closest to borough that we could find emergency accommodation for her. So the situation is really, really critical, and we have to do everything in our power to manage it, but it's very difficult, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you. Right, I've seen. Oh,
I think part of the question was Denise was trying to answer about
oh,
if we have any sense. Sorry,
apologies. There was a question about
a ratio and also
wasn't
what
there?
types of families are we supporting, continue to support ourselves rather than placing them in private rented sector. Thank you.
Yes, so we currently have around about 2,600 households living in temporary accommodation. 500 or so of those moved in pre-localism, so are waiting in temporary accommodation to get their social housing. Mostly that's the larger households, because that's what takes the longest, as we touched on in the earlier discussion. The way it works as people come in is that wherever possible, at the point where people are threatened with homelessness, we do our private sector let to prevent them needing to go into temporary accommodation in the beginning. So the table in 4.414 of our 256 lets that Councillor Carlin mentioned, over 200 went actually to stop people going in the first place. Far fewer went to people to take them out of accommodation once they're in there. We use the HCBS to move people out of temporary accommodation, because that's a much more stable form of private rented, and we know that households can be there for the initial 7 years, and then we'll make decisions about the future of those properties. So it's an assessment family by family. So if we do an assessment on a family, it could be about vulnerability, it could be often about affordability. So any families who benefit capped move into the private rented sector isn't even an option. So it's very much each person in temporary accommodation has a rehousing officer who does that sort of assessment case by case. And then we have a list of people who are either move ready and could live in the private sector financially, and we don't have any concerns, or they're not yet move ready, need to find work, need additional support. So it's kind of case by case. I can maybe send some figures on proportions, but it's a case by case assessment.
thank you. Right, so I saw Councillor Ajay first.
Thank you. For those, it's just, I mean, these, in terms of what you outlined, isn't new, and Haringey is not unique. So this goes back years, and that's why the waiting list keeps going up and up and up. And those in the private sector, we renew where we can with the private sector landlord. So I just want to find out political stuff. Has there been any discussions with the shadow cabinet secretary, as it were, on housing and what Labour will do? Because part of this problem was the right to buy, and people are still buying where they can, exercising their rights. And also in terms of the current government, I know, we all know, but has any attempt been made to write to them in terms of the issues that you've outlined? So that's number one. And two, the ASTs just need to understand, when we visited Apex Gardens, some of the properties that were shown in terms of, we were showed on a particular floor in the scheme, because they do just rentals. Are those the 34, or are these additional to what we saw when we visited the site? Because it's all part of because the way it's been presented here is as if they are new stuff, but I just need to understand whether these are what was agreed with Granger previously. Because if you look at 4.4.13, it indicates that it's new, but when they were building the building, that's been earmarked, yeah, for this type of accommodation. So I just need to have that clear, that is it that, or is it something new in addition? Yeah.
If I just answer that one, it's not new. It just took a while for them to come through. So we had nomination rights to the properties that were identified in the beginning.
Sorry, Chair, those are just the 2 points I want to clarify. The first, the political, and then obviously this has been dealt with.
I have spoken to other cabinet leads across London. It's not unique. There are other boroughs that are in similar positions, but the position in Haringey is pretty bad. In terms of what is unique is the unaffordability of the accommodation, and that is that's more kind of central London. But the fact that Haringey is considered outer North London for LHA rates, but in actual fact our rents are closer to inner London. So we have particular difficulties with that. So our position in Haringey, there are a few other boroughs that are in similar positions, but Haringey always has been one of the boroughs with the most difficult circumstances. You know, going back 10, 15 years, it was always Haringey was the one that had the most difficult circumstances in terms of the number of social homes available and the number of people who became homeless, etc. So we are in particular. So in terms of that, we have discussed with other housing leads. In terms of politically where policy is going, if the renters' white paper becomes law, that's game changing. It's got things in it that aren't great. You know, some of the mandatory grounds for it's not perfect by any means. But what it does, and some of the things are quite harsh, so it's not perfect. But what it does do is it gets rid of Section 21, no fault evictions, and only allows evictions in a limited and brings in a form of rent control. And if that becomes law, that's going to be, I think, make quite a difference. But we have to see now. We don't know what's going to happen. In terms of where the Labour Party is on rent and on social rent, etc., I'm not completely sure, to be completely honest. And I don't know where we are at the moment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So I saw Councillor Blake first and then Councillor Hymas. So Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I kind of hear the overview. I understand that. I have to defer to your knowledge and technical expertise, but I kind of struggled with this paper and the kind of thing, you mentioned the thing around the LHA rate. So does that mean that inner London boroughs get more money in terms of subsidising their temporary accommodation, but they then house them outside? Because they're not going to house them in Camden and Westminster, are they? They're probably shifting them out. Is that what's happening, or no?
It's the amount of money within an area, an LHA rate. It's the amount of money that you're allowed within the area. So if Westminster was moving someone off to wherever, the LHA rate for that area, it would have to be on the LHA rate of that area. It's what the rents are and how much, it's what the housing element of universal credit or housing benefit will cover in a property. That's the LHA rate. So when I say the difficulty that we have in Haringey is that we have high rentals, but the LHA rate, which has been dropping, the government is cutting it, we're out of North London. So the amount that people can pay who are on benefits, the amount of money that they can get in housing related benefits is less because it's out of North London than it would be in inner North London, such as Islington or Camden. So it's the housing benefit element that I'm talking about.
So just following up on that, so I then presume, taking that logic, if we're in the same group as, say, Barking and Dagenham, which I presume they've got a private rented sector where rents are lower, they're going to be in a much better position than us. Have I got that right?
It will be easier, it will be closer.
Okay.
So ours is like, it's about a £4,500 gap between what people can claim in housing benefits, or whatever the gap is. That's the average of what we're overpaying per year, in terms of what people can claim in benefits and what the rent actually is.
Okay. And my final comment is just an observation generally around this area and housing generally, in terms, if you look at somewhere like health or education, where you kind of know, even if you're, an ignoramus like me, the key kind of indicators, you know the waiting list times, the A&E times. I don't kind of get that sense in housing that these are the key things I should be looking at. It all seems, and I think part of it is, I think we're far too apologetic for a whole ecosystem around housing that is absolutely, frankly, absurd.
Yeah,
it is totally absurd, and we should be. And I personally think politically, it's a political point. As a socialist, we should be saying it is completely absurd, right? In terms of who we're subsidising the landlords and penalising the people in housing need. And I think we really need to kind of get back to that. Be proud to say that as politicians. I know officers can't say that, but the whole thing is completely the wrong way round. I'll be polite. I could use another phrase. And it's absolutely absurd. And we need to be saying it's absurd, not just that the politicians are in power, but the ones who, after this week are, apparently preparing for power. And I don't think that message is getting across. Thanks, Chair.
Look, I agree with you and I don't agree with you, unfortunately. And I'll tell you why. I agree with you. I think the fact that not just us, it's that housing benefit subsidises landlords. But the position that we're in at the moment is that we have over 40% of our households or our residents, in some wards, it's over 50%. Haringey ward, Woodside ward, your ward, it's over 50%, it's around 50% of households are actually renting from private landlords. And a lot of those households are in receipt of housing-related benefits. If all of those landlords sell up and leave, we haven't got the capacity in Haringey to house them, which means that then the discussions are going to be, where are we going to put people? How are we going to fulfill our statutory duties? And are we going to do what some boroughs have done, which I really don't want to see, which is they have a policy, an actual policy, Labour councils or a Labour council, to send everybody to the outskirts of Wolverhampton. And that's it. And that was the policy. Everybody, except for very few people. That included kids halfway through A-levels. That included single mothers with a baby who'd, discharge of duty, not just in that London borough, but to the outskirts of Wolverhampton. Unfortunately, the ecosystem that we have at the moment is where we are, is we need good private landlords. I completely agree. The bad ones, we don't want them in borough, and selective landlord license is going to make a difference. But good private landlords at the moment, in terms of the ecosystem, we need them. Because we can't house everybody in Haringey, because so many people are living in private sector accommodation, which means we have so little council housing. So, if 40% are in private sector and 30,000, whatever percent are in council social rented, it's about 30,000 in total. And the rest are privately owned. But we don't have enough social housing to house everybody in Haringey. So so that's difficult. We can hammer private landlords, but I'd just rather hammer bad private landlords.
Yeah, I'm not saying hammer. Yeah, I'm not saying hammer private landlords. I'm just saying the broader political point. We need a different way.
Yeah,
the money's going to the wrong people.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, Tammy, you had a question.
It's kind of related, but will you publicly campaign for rent controls for private landlords?
Personally, the only way that we ensure that residents are able to stay in a property if what the rent is at, if we bring in assured tenancies, you have to have rent controls, but it's part of a whole package. So rent controls have to be part of the package, which is, there's no point in having rent controls if you can also just have no fault evictions. Because if you have no fault evictions, then a landlord wants to put the rent up, then all they're going to do is evict somebody to put the rent up. That's an even worse position. So what we need is the whole package. We need to get rid of no fault evictions. And in order to do that, we also need to have rent controls. Those two things have to go together, because otherwise the landlord, in order to evict, puts up the rent.
So will you speak with other cabinet members in London with a view towards coming up with a campaign to take forward
Absolutely.
both to the leadership of the current government and the leadership of our own party, the Labour Party?
Yeah, I mean, I
So,
think.
yeah, so
I mean,
that's
something that I believe in fundamentally. So yes, absolutely.
Great, thank you very much for that. Okay, I do want to wind up this item, but Isidoros, you had something?
Thank you, Chair. And that will be my last question. I'm not delaying your committee. There's no doubt, obviously, we've got a crisis. There's no doubt the private sector renting is a part of the solution, at the moment at least. Goes with that the conditions of the private sector around. And I think it's wider than just those who are rent flats, but also all the multiple occupation ones. There are some tragic cases, and they're increasing vastly, and there are families living in some sort of like in rooms, etc. So that's as a broad perspective. But one of the things that interests me is that why we are at the moment at the level where we supply every year something like 300, yeah. It's not long ago that it was around 1,500, if you remember the news, years back, all that kind of thing. And it's not explainable just simply by the loss of the stock or the right to buy, yeah? I think that there are other reasons, and I think we have to really look at this as well, whether policy-wise. I would say something that might sound controversial, but one of the things is that we demolish too many of our council flats, and that means we lose them for 2 or 3 or 5 years until they will be replaced by something new. Just to take High Road West and Broadwater Farm that you mentioned, between them there are about 550 or 550 flats we'll be demolishing. Therefore, that's more than what we lose from right to buy, straight away. And it will take years before we replace them to start with. And this is just from these two. There may be more. And so I think we need to really look at that one, it's my view. I want to also ask, we used to do a lot more with housing associations, and probably the situation has changed a lot, Denise, but it might be worth to say, what are our relationships, with housing associations, and how they are playing, with us on meeting this housing need and the temporary accommodation, etc., because that used to be a big thing. I know circumstances have changed, but it is still a big issue. And the tiny little bit in 422.5, I agree with Dana that the estimate there, or the average net cost to the general fund, I'm not talking about the housing revenue account, for losing one council flat or gaining one council flat, the average, but it may be 4,400, but that's the average. The figure that we're using in our budget estimates in general, and which has been agreed with external auditors and all kind of thing, is 4 times that. It's about 18,000 per unit on average as a rule of thumb. And I suspect the explanation is because some of ours we pay nothing basically because we put them in empty council houses just until the thing, and others are far more. But it is quite a substantial. So for the margins, for the next, let's say 2,000 that we would do, it would be a lot more saving to the council than 4,500 a year.
If I can just come in, I'll ask Ruth maybe or someone else to answer the Housing Association. When Birkbeck Lodge was built, within the first year, it saved the revenue account, council revenue account, as emergency accommodation, what was nearly £2 million, nearly £2 million saved off the road from one lodge. So yeah, this is my ask of officers, to try to acquire whatever we can of our own accommodation. So we give people choices. We say we can keep you in borough. Might not be a flat. It might be a unit within that we've converted within something. Might not be your ideal, what you'd like to have. But you'd stay in borough, it's affordable, and we can afford it. So this is part of what we're looking at trying to do in terms of our temporary accommodation. Yeah, no, I agree with Doris. In terms of housing associations, I don't know whether we've considered that as part of the mix. Ruth, anyone? Yeah. Denise?
I mean, I think historically we used to have very strong relationships with housing associations around temporary accommodation, which I think might be what you're referring to. They used to lease a lot of properties from private landlords and we'd use them as temporary accommodation. Housing associations, because of the kind of financial challenges, have moved away from that sector. So we've gone from having hundreds of those down to maybe 60 or so, but they're gradually moving away from that sector.
Just the deals where we had nomination rights because we were helping them, things like that. Therefore, we could really use that.
So in terms of permanent social housing, we still have nomination rights. So we get 100% of nominations to their new build social rented and then 75% of relets. So we're looking to build again on that relationship with housing associations. Robbie has now got a partnership person in his team, and we're building that round a kind of homelessness ask to partners in the borough, including the RPs.
On the issue of losing so much because we are demolishing them, could we delay, for example, some of those for 2 or 3 years until we have a better situation, rather than taking them out of our stock and having to pay private accommodation or that kind of thing? Or say 550 just from these 2 projects.
That's a question for Ruth, I think.
At the moment, the reason why we don't have enough properties to take people out of temporary accommodation is because we actually paralyze a lot of them or demolish them, our existing stock, in order to build in the future to replace them with new buildings, etc. The actual figures are substantial, and I think it's a bigger factor than the right to buy at this moment in time. All right, you may be in 5 years' time we will get in Broadwater Farm a replacement for the 250 properties, that we will lose. But by these 5 years, we've got 250 less properties to let. That kind of thing. That kind of thing. Isn't that something that needs to be thought out?
I suppose. It's not really my portfolio. It's Ruth, but. Obviously, in terms of some of the building that we're doing where we are demolishing, Broadwater Farm because those buildings are unsafe, High Road West because we have the existing, pre-existing agreements, which at least now we are going to get 500 additional properties on on High Road West. But obviously there is the interim where blocks are cleared, and that has happened for a while, where we end up with a deficit in the period of time until we can build. And that is true, we know that. But I suppose, answering on behalf of my colleague, the choice for us is, are we going to do it to then develop that additional and get the additional amounts, or do we not? Broadwater Farm, as we know, it was a safety and age of buildings, etc. issue as well. So, but I can refer to Ruth.
Well, just to add on Broadwater Farm, I think in North Holt, I think I'm right in saying pretty much all one bedroom flats. In North Holt, for example, on Broadwater Farm, they pretty much were all, I think they were all one bed flats.
But the other one, most are 3 bedroom. On the about 60 of them are 3 bedroom flats.
Sorry? 10 is only about 80 flats.
Yeah. So
it's about 80 flats.
What will be
140.
And what we'll be replacing with them is larger family homes. So that's one of the aspects of that scheme, is that we will be looking at 3 and 4 bedroom homes on Broadwater Farm, and that is going to relieve a massive amount of pressure where we can. Obviously, all of these choices are choices about where we, what we do and how quickly we decant those. The sort of length of time between the decant and getting the rebuild, that is always going to be, an issue where you are taking buildings down. It isn't my preference, and I don't think it's anybody's preference, to be going around demolishing stuff all over the place. We've moved away from that, but in this particular circumstance, it's been a long-standing issue where we know we debated for a long time the whole question of the health and safety on those blocks, and I think we've come up with a scheme that was ratified by the residents with a massive vote that gave us 85% in favour of the refurbishment plans. I think that was a vote of confidence in that particular scheme. So I just wanted to add that in about the replacement of family homes on that scheme.
Okay, thanks. I think we need to move on now because we're getting late, but thank you very, very much, Dana and Denise. And I think, well, we've just got the Ward's Corner item now, so you're free to leave if you unless you want to stay and listen to us talk about Ward's Corner, which you're welcome to do. Okay, so final report on today's agenda is an update on the Ward's Corner scheme and the acquisitions that were made or were agreed by Cabinet about a month ago, wasn't it? Please.
Yeah, again, I'll just give a short introduction to the paper and then leave it open for questions. Just to say that what we've been doing on this site and has been in quite a long gestation. So just going back to when I first took on the role of Cabinet member, this is one of the first sort of projects that I asked officers to get off the ground as to what we could do on the Ward's Corner site in the wake of understanding what that Granger was pulling out and that we were able to get out of the development agreement. And I would say, just maybe be a bit cheeky and take this opportunity of thanking the team of officers that have worked tirelessly over the last 18 months and more to actually get a scheme. You can't imagine how much effort it takes to start from scratch with and putting a scheme and going through all the various permutations of making sure that it has got some viability and that we've got a scheme that will be taken at the least possible risk to the council, but also answering the issues that we know have been in the Seven Sisters area for some time. This was like a campaign to rejuvenate that area has been going on for a long time, and I suppose that really comes to the point as to why on earth we should do this as a council. You know, we're not developers. We're not in the business of, well, let's go and build a hotel on a site, or let's go and just build for the sake of building. The reason why we wanted to put forward a development on the Wards Corner site was because we understand how that corner is a vital part of our town centre strategy. It's part of our placemaking strategy and taking advantage of the multicultural area that is there, but with the understanding that we've got responsibilities as a council to make sure that we answer the sort of economic issues that are in that area. So we know we've got an area of some economic deprivation. On the other hand, we've got an area that is actually very vibrant. It's got a lot of shops around there. It's got a very good food and beverage sort of vibe, if you like, that exists in the area. And certainly it's got a very multicultural community with a large proportion of Latin American businesses and residents around there, which has been at the heart of what was with the market. And we've been working very, very closely with TfL to try and make sure that that market is reinstated. I would also want to just add, really, that a couple of points that are not in the report that we can just give as an update, that we understand from TfL that we have that the health and safety works are progressing. I hope that is a positive thing. I think they've been undertaking those works for quite some time now, and we've been a little bit concerned about the sort of slowness of delivery on that. But we have received some confirmation today that they are getting underway, and I can see for myself that there's been some progress there. So we're looking forward to them announcing the chair's position of the partnership board, and we understand that that is imminent. So our next steps really are to carry through the acquisitions that were agreed in the July cabinet paper. That is all going through the process of taking place, and we will be developing the site on the back of that, and we will also be enabling the temporary market to make use of some parts of that site. So that is part of the agreement we will have with TfL. So we'll be working very closely with TfL so that we can make sure that temporary market is reinstated and that the traders can come back onto that site. The most important thing for us, I think, is to be working with the local community. There's a huge amount of interest around Wards Corner. There's been a long history of it, and we're going to be making sure that the developments that we take place are co-designed, co-produced with local residents, with the local businesses, and we think it's a really good opportunity. So I'll leave my remarks there and just open it up, because I'm sure there will be lots of questions.
Thank you very much for that. Right, I'm going to throw it open to questions straight away. So, Tammy.
Yeah, you stated in your cabinet member introduction back in July that you were trying to deliver on the aspirations of the community plan. Obviously, as I understand, the community plan refers to something quite specific, which is the community plan, community benefit society bid for running the market. Now, obviously, with the appointment of a chair and this board, there's no guarantee that the community plan is going to actually get the lease to the market. And I understand that there is another bidder, the Creative Land Trust. Do you think we can still refer to this scheme as delivering on the aspirations of the community plan if the community plan doesn't win the bid for the market?
Well, I think that we've already made it, we've always made it clear that we've supported the community plan and the aspirations of that plan. I am hoping that they will put in a very good bid, but obviously that is in the gift of the partnership board, and I'm convinced that there will be a very good bid. And what would be more preferable, really, is if there could be a coming together of all of those aspects, all of those parties to that bid, and have a unified bid. What I think we have achieved is that we have got a commitment from TfL that the lease will be done on a community asset-led lease. So it will be a lease that will be have the market at its heart, and will be, as a community asset as opposed to a commercial-led lease. And we are very keen on that progresses in that way. The rest of the development will hopefully work in with whatever happens. So the market should be part of whatever happens going forward, and whether it is, the Community Benefit Society or whether it's the Creative Land Trust, then obviously we'll have to work with whatever materialises. It would be very, I think, beneficial to all of us if we could get the market re-established and the traders re-established, and have a Latin and multicultural market operating in that. What goes alongside it will be other businesses and council homes for the first time ever destined for that site, because up until this point it would have been just private homes and no council homes in it at all. So our responsibility is on the rest of the site. We'll be working hand in glove with whatever emerges out of the TfL process.
And will we have a representative from the council on the partnership board?
Yes, we were asking to have a representative on that, though I think in the terms of we would have to recuse ourselves from the decision on the lease, because we have already made a preference for the community plan. So, but in terms of the partnership board and how the site is managed going forward, we would want to take, we would want to participate in that.
Just on that, the way you see it, that would that be a councillor or an officer?
We haven't had that discussion yet with TfL, and we're trying to clarify with TfL what the exact terms of reference are of the partnership board.
Okay, any more questions? Charles.
Not so much a question, it's just to say that at least if you look at paragraph 6.3, that I'm very pleased, given the issues that we had previously with the ownership of the site, that most of the questions and health and safety, you name it, were aimed at the council previously, but at least now there's clarity there. Well, we've always known, but at least that the site is owned by TfL, and I mean, it's just the last sentence there I would have preferred to have seen that the council will need to continue to work, because we've always worked with TfL, but it just said we'll need to continue, I think, to work with TfL to ensure that given where we are currently, because previously we were tied into a previous, we talked about Love Lane, something we inherited, but at least now, with the collapse of the Granger scheme, it's opportunity. But in terms of the health and safety stuff that you talked about as well, all that, there's much clarity about who owns what, where, and now having to work with and I'll just say that I hope we don't get ourselves into such a situation in the future. It just goes back to what Councillor that Kidis was saying earlier, but I didn't want to come in at that time talking about council demolishing homes. We don't demolish homes. We look to replace them with good ones where we've been told that there are issues. So we just need to be mindful of that. But I'm really, pleased about that clarity there, which we've always known in any case.
Okay, thanks for that comment. Of course you can.
Sorry, it was just just for the record, and because we're, this is public, a public body. I just wanted to make it clear that we will be very soon discussing with the businesses that exist on the site and with the surrounding businesses as well. So that's part of our placemaking plan. So I just wanted to make sure that people, that if you've got a business on that, in Seven Sisters, and or whether you live in Suffield Road, or that that we won't be doing anything without consulting you extensively and involving you in our plans. So I just wanted to add that assurance.
Thanks. Go ahead.
Sorry, Chair. Just on that, in terms of engaging with the community, I think the community should be made aware that obviously it's not the council per se. The council is a partner, but this site, obviously, going back to the question that Tammy asked about, your previous comments, that this is being led by TfL, more or less. Although the council's got a preference in terms of who this site goes to. Yeah, very good point about engagement and communication, because you don't want the residents and the tenants there, in terms of the market owners, attacking the council again, saying, no, the council is not doing this, council is not doing it. So we need to get that clear, very clear, in terms of comms. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to ask, really, I wanted to look into the future and think how. I know it's a long. We're a long way from having a kind of fully formed scheme, but obviously we've got one bit of the site that is owned by TfL. TfL is going to give a long-term lease to a market operator, and then we've got another larger part of the site that the council is now in the process of obtaining ownership of in order to pursue its own scheme. So I know that it says here that one of the objectives is to maximise the amount of council housing that is built there. And obviously, as we've discussed earlier in this meeting, there is currently a preference to cross-subsidise this through market sale, although that might change, so we can see the possibilities that there are there. But on the council bit, in addition to the market site, which is obviously TfL-led, are we going to be providing any commercial space there? And is that going to? Are we envisaging that that would remain council owned, or and I know you said before, are we not? We're not envisaging that we're going to go into partnership with a developer to push forward this program as you've discussed earlier, but are we going to go into partnership with any other kind of commercial organisations, or are there any? What are your thoughts on that? Really, this is. I'm trying to envisage what it's going to look like in the future when it's done, in terms of who owns it, what's there, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, I haven't got a plan that we would get another developer in there. I think that would be very controversial, and I think what we will do is develop it as a site, as we've developed lots of other sites, as we've got plans for developing sort of the Gurley site that is just up the road, for example. Each site has to meet its viability tests, and we will be just exploring that. We haven't got to that granular level of detail yet, and we would want to make sure that so what we're doing is we are purchasing leases, for example, which are existing businesses down there. We want to assure those businesses that there won't be anything that they will be able to continue. They need to plan ahead. We were going to be giving them those assurances. So that the site, as I see it, will be a mixed site of commercial and residential. It may be that we could find some room for some workspace. I don't know. That depends on the viability of the site. If the price of workspace is going up and we can charge more for it, maybe there would be some room. At the moment, it probably you would get more bang for your buck, if you like, if it's residential and commercial, I would say. But all of these things are always in a state of flux, so we have to sort of like work through the scheme in more granular detail as we go down the sort of journey. At the moment, it's at a sort of high level, if you like, that we will be acquiring these leases, making sure that we've got control of the whole site. We get the market back on that sort of added bonus that we can use some of that, the car park land, for example, in order to enable the market to come back into use. And we will develop a scheme that will build around that. Obviously, there's a lot of heritage building around that site as well, which not only the Ward's Corner, but there's a lot of heritage buildings around where the shops are, the wine shop and the Sainsbury's and so on. And certainly what we'd be looking for is to make sure that we have got a plan that takes all of that into account and is a viable plan. So it's not easy, but we're going to give it our best shot, and we think we can have a good scheme coming out of it. I hope I can't be any clearer than that. Sorry,
no,
Matt,
okay.
but
all right.
We can have more reports as we get further down the road.
I think that would be good. Yeah, good to keep an eye on that. Great. Thank you very much. Thanks. Does anyone have any further questions on this item? No. Well, thank you very much then. We've just got some work programme to talk about now, so you're all free to go. Thank you very much for coming this evening and answering the panel's questions. Okay, great. So what have we got to say on the work programme? We had this Scrutiny Cafe, so how's the work programme?
We did have a Scrutiny Cafe. So some of the discussion points from the cafe, some of the themes that came up along with the Scrutiny survey that was held are being pulled together for OSC on the 13th of October. So at that meeting, OSC will get a programme for each of the panels based on the discussions that sort of puts forward what the key themes were. That'll be for them to go through and to note. And I guess after that, very quickly after that, we will be using the information in that to formulate a work plan. So I'll be circulating a work plan to the panel in the week or so after OSC, and we can agree that via email so that it's ready to go. Obviously, part of that process will be fleshing out the scrutiny review that you want to do around private rented sector.
Great, thanks a lot. And in terms of the scrutiny review on the private rental sector, we're hoping to get together to discuss that in the week beginning the 24th of October. Is that right, Philip?
Yep, so from the responses I've had so far, Thursday the 27th looks like the date that the people who've responded can do. So, I mean, if we could, pencil that in. I mean, I'm assuming obviously an evening meeting suits people best at 6 o'clock. But I will send round an invite. Thank you.
Great, thanks for that, Philip. Okay, anything to raise under this about the work programme? Anyone? Nothing, and we have no new items of urgent business. So just to note that the date of our next meeting is on the 1st of November. And